cruelty well used. We must be talking about Niccolo Machiavelli and the Prince. Who was Niccolo Machiavelli? Niccolo Machiavelli was a political thinker, a philosopher, a political scientist, late 1400s, early 1500s in Florence, Italy. What makes Machiavelli so distinctive? So distinctive, as a matter of fact, that modern scholars have called him the first modern man. Why is this? Machiavelli was one of the first thinkers to actually analyze the difference between how men ought to act as opposed to how men actually do act. Let's break that down. How men ought to act as opposed to how men actually are. Philosophy, up until the Renaissance, essentially taught that man should be moral. Man should be ethically bound. And that was based on a lot of the classical world. Let's break this down a little bit. Let's talk about the Renaissance. Machiavelli was a man of the Renaissance. Renaissance at its root essentially means that something has died and something has been reborn. Okay, let's talk about that. If something has died, a logical question is, well, what's died? There was a belief that there was something spectacular or something magnificent about the past, about the ancient Greek world, about the Republic of Rome, and then the Roman Empire, that there was something magnificent that had died and had gone dormant during the Middle Ages. The Renaissance is the rebirth of all of that knowledge. Let's talk about that knowledge. The knowledge had two big basic roots, Latin and Greek. The Latin was very accessible to the Western world, especially the Western Europe, due to the church. The church had used Latin as its base. What wasn't acceptable, what wasn't as accessible, is the Greek. Let's break this down a little further. The philosophies of such individuals as Cicero, who was a philosopher and a politician in the late Roman Republic, was very accessible to Western Europe. Cicero wrote extensively on things like ethics, on governance. What wasn't as accessible to individuals in the Renaissance was the Greek of, obviously, classical Greece, specifically Aristotle. Aristotle and Cicero both wrote extensively on ethics and on the way in which you should govern. And their philosophies really rooted in the fact that no unethical act, no immoral act can have a positive outcome. Think about that for a second. In governing, no immoral act can have a positive outcome. Well, along comes Machiavelli. Machiavelli was a diplomat. He worked for the Florentine government. Italy at this point, you have to understand, Italy around late 1400s, early 1500s, Italy didn't exist as we see it now. Italy was not one country. It was broken up into many, many different small little principalities, one of which was the Republic of Florence, which Machiavelli served as a diplomat. As a diplomat, he was sent off to all the German states of the Holy Roman Empire. He was sent off to France. He was sent off to different areas, as well as all of the different city-states in Italy, and he was able to observe firsthand what works, what doesn't. This was very important to Machiavelli for a big reason. He loved Italy, he loved Florence, and at that point, it was a very, very bad time for Italy. Italy was so fractured that foreign governments, the French army was ravaging up and down the peninsula. The Spanish were in there. They were ravaging each other. It was a bad time for Italy. So Machiavelli, as this student of statecraft, is looking around. He's stating things are not good. We are being ravaged. The foreign armies are going through us. What do we have to do differently? How should we govern ourselves? And as this student, he began to develop a new philosophy. So the Prince. How did this remarkable revolutionary book get written? Let's break this down again. So Machiavelli is a diplomat. He's working for the Florentine government when all of a sudden the Medici, who were a former ruling family, sweep back into power into Florence. The Florentine Republic falls, and Machiavelli now is out of a job. Not only is he out of a job, he is accused of being so against the Medici that he may be a threat. Machiavelli is arrested and he's tortured. After he's tortured, they find out that he probably isn't as much of a threat as they thought, so they allow him to go and say that he can stay in Florence. I don't know about you, but you're tortured. He decides he wants a little bit of distance between himself and the city. So he retires to a family farm. His father had willed him a farm, a very meager little farm on the outskirts of Florence. It was so close, actually, that from the farm, even today, you can see the dome of the cathedral in Florence. It was close, but it was far enough away that he felt a little security that maybe they won't just grab him and torture him again, which, once again, that makes a lot of sense. So he's now in forced exile. Understand that Machiavelli is a political animal. This guy really enjoys politics. He enjoyed diplomacy. He enjoyed watching foreign leaders. He really loved the mechanics of government. And now he's out of office. Now he's sitting on a farm with pigs and with the crops and local peasants, and he has no way to give vent to this passion of his. He spends all day dealing with farm things. At night, he will actually sit down and he has a little study with a little modest little table, and he will write. He will begin to write down what he has observed over the many years of his service to Florentine. And this is fascinating. Had Machiavelli not experienced this misfortune, had he not been exiled, there's a very good chance that his book, The Prince, the discourses in the first 10 books of Livy, some of his other great works would have never been written, because he would have frankly been busy writing a report for this diplomat, or writing a report on grain supplies or foreign troop movements, whatever. He would have been deal with the day-to-day stuff. He wouldn't have had the time. And now he's got the time. He's in forced exile. This political animal now decides he is going to commit to paper all of the things he has learned over the many years, resulting in The Prince. Okay, let's come full circle now. Cruelty well used. Remember that phrase? Cruelty well used. We want to take that phrase and put it into separate piles. Cruelty and well used, how can that be something that is together? This is something that Machiavelli investigates. He looks at those around him, and he looks for examples of cruelty well used, and he finds that in certain circumstances, cruelty can be well used. How shocking. Remember Cicero, remember Aristotle. No immoral, no unethical act can possibly have positive outcomes. Machiavelli challenges this. As previously stated, Machiavelli effectively uses examples in The Prince. The example that he uses the most is a guy named Cesare Borgia. Cesare Borgia was one of the badasses of history. Cesare Borgia was a contemporary of Machiavelli. Machiavelli actually knew this guy. Cesare Borgia's father was a pope. Back then, popes could have kids and they could tell people about it, and it was all right. So anyhow, the pope has a kid. Pope at that point is the Borgia family, he wanted to create a principality for his family. Although popes had power, once that pope passed, there was no kingdom. That pope wanted something different. So he helped his son, who was very capable in his own right, conquer an area called the Romagna in Italy. Now, the Romagna was an area that was still is very, very hilly, very mountainous, very difficult to control. So when his son Cesare Borgia, through a bunch of political machinations and maneuvers and everything else, when he finally achieves the ability to conquer some of the Romagna, one of the first things he experiences is there's no law and order. There's thievery, brigandage, there's rape, there's theft. It's a rough place. And so you have a lot of these peasants that are living in the Romagna. They simply want to grow their crop. They want to take their crop to market, and they want to live their life. But they can't, because the law and order, it just doesn't exist. So there's a need to establish law and order. Remember we said a moment ago, cruelty well used. Cesare Borgia brings in a guy named Diorca. Diorca is a Spaniard, and this was a rough guy. Cesare Borgia decides what he's going to do is he's going to put Diorca in charge. And Diorca begins to do law and order. If you steal something, your hand's cut off. You murder someone, they take off your head. There's just no kidding around. I mean, absolutely clamps down hard on this area. Now, Cesare Borgia does something here which Machiavelli considers pretty brilliant. Cesare Borgia is attempting to really, really rein in this area. So he brings in Diorca, who's going to be the heavy, comes in and makes it happen. Well, you got to understand, when you're the heavy and people you're chopping off hands and chopping off heads, that head you just chopped off, that's somebody's son. That's somebody's father. That's somebody knows that guy that you just had killed, and you're going to upset people, obviously, right? So Machiavelli, you can see why his name has become Machiavellian, meaning to be cunning or maybe devious. He praises Cesare Borgia for this next act. Cesare Borgia, remember, Diorca is his man. Diorca is in there just clamping down. Well, the people of a village wake up one morning and they see this Diorca, who's now become quite hated, and in the piazza in the morning, Diorca's one half of his body is on this side, the other half of his body is on that side, because he was sawed in half and placed in the piazza. Everyone there knew that Cesare Borgia was the one that ordered this. And look what Cesare Borgia has done here. He has clamped down on the negative things that have happened. The blame has gone to Diorca. Everybody knows that Cesare is the guy that had him cut in half and placed. Cesare has essentially distanced himself from the acts while also showing the local peasantry that he's a pretty tough guy. So Cesare Borgia has essentially distanced himself from the act. Diorca has been blamed for the brutality. Cesare Borgia has achieved the pacification of the Romagna, but he has not been hated. And this is one of the key elements of the Prince. The Prince famously talks about, is it better to be loved or feared as a ruler? He, of course, argues the both. I mean, if you're able to be loved and feared, outstanding. But he makes the argument, if you're loved as a prince, you put on a great festival. You're a really great guy. Everybody loves you. Your constituents, those you are ruling over, still will betray you. They're gonna, if the next guys in the festival is gonna be a little bit better, if they're gonna get a little more benefits, they'll betray you. Now, if they fear you, if they're concerned that their head's going to get chopped off or their family's farm is going to be burned down, now they're a little less likely to do that. But he makes the very big distinction in the Prince. You need to be feared without being hated. That's a difficult trick to do. Feared without being hated. That is why Cesare Borgia did the maneuver he did, in which he put Diorca to death in such a public way. So now I'm going to put a question to you. Actually, it's the question that Machiavelli puts to us in The Prince. It's what we do on this channel. We discuss historical dilemmas. And if you like what we're doing on this channel, please take a moment, hit subscribe below. I'd really appreciate it. Okay, the dilemma that Machiavelli puts forth, and remember he used the Romagna as an example. Scenario one, you've got an area that it's a rough area. There's murder, there's rape, there's thievery. Giovanni cannot grow his crop and take it to market because he's going to get mugged and killed along the way. There's no law and order. So in the scenario one Machiavelli puts forth, what is better? Is it better to be moral, as Cicero or Aristotle would say, and to not be harsh with local people that are doing things wrong, that it's unethical to do bad things to people, because no ethical, no unjust act can ever have positive results. So scenario one, the rulers are not going to come down very hard on people because it's unethical to do those things to people. But in scenario one, the place is chaos and people are being hurt. Scenario two, you take anyone who is breaking the law or hurting people, and you chop off their heads. You chop off their arms. It is brutal. It is what Cicero or Aristotle would consider unethical. But in scenario two, crime almost stops. Giovanni can now take his crop from his home to the market and not worry about being killed. So Machiavelli puts it out there, and he doesn't give an answer. That's up to us to decide. Scenario one, we're bound by traditional ethics, chaos abounds. Scenario two, we use what we would consider unethical means to clamp down, to create an environment which is actually safer for people. This is the dilemma. Option 1 or option 2? You decide.